Welcome to the Business Owners Counsel, Legal Issues from Growth to Exit.
Welcome back to the Business Owners Counsel, From Growth to Exit with Kevin Brick. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host. This is the show for Florida business owners, where we get practical, plain English legal strategies for building stronger companies. From avoiding costly disputes to scaling smart to maximizing your business's value at exit. In each episode, we'll sit down with Kevin Brick, founder of Brick Business Law, to talk through the exact playbooks his firm uses to help businesses thrive. Kevin and his team have guided Florida companies through litigation, transactions, employment issues, and growth challenges of all kinds. Whether you're growing fast, facing a tough decision, or preparing for the sale of your company, this podcast will give you the tools and insights you need to move forward with confidence. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Kevin, what does getting ready to sell actually mean in practice?
Well, businesses that do sell and they're ready to sell often have things that are consistent between them. One is that the revenue and the operations are contractually protected, meaning they keep going. There's a system in place for them. And that system means that the business actually runs without the owner. That's what we talk about in terms of being transferable, that systems in place make it keep going. And then everything really is documented and very explainable. So if a new owner comes in to execute and run on this business, they can be successful because they see what needs to be done, how it's done, why it's done, and all of those things are part of a transferable system that makes the business very valuable.
And this isn't a fast process. Why do owners need 2 to 3 years to prepare?
Yeah, people are surprised at the amount of time it takes, but if you think about, the process of developing a strategy and then identifying issues with the business, implementing changes, evaluating the outcomes, seeing the results, there's a little bit of a life cycle of this process. And so affecting change within a business does take some time. And so I would say the main reasons are, when you're talking about contracts or different legal structures, that it does take time to identify issues with them, fix them, implement them. Same thing with employee changes. Everybody who's working in a business, they understand that making changes sometimes is difficult. You want to get feedback and then make better changes. And then also when you're talking about just structural cleanup in general, you can't really rush through those things. You want to do them well and diligently. So those things, they just do take time. And then you actually sequence things. Like some things have to be done first. And then once they're done, we go into the next order of things. So all those pieces, when you look at them, you really are talking about a multi-year process to do it well.
And then what are the biggest legal value drivers?
I would say having very standardized contracts. So business contracts, just to give it some context, you're talking about keeping relationships in place with customers, with vendors, with employees. So a business really, it's a system of things that happen and happen well. And you want to have contracts to keep those things in place and continue to happen in a repeatable best practices type of way. Another big legal driver is having a very clean ownership and entity structure. Sometimes family businesses in particular over time, they make promises about things, they do things with less formality, and that builds uncertainty into the corporate structure, which is not what you want. You want it to be very certain when a new buyer comes in. And then one other one I would say is just kind of typical asset and risk tools in place. So like IP, asset protections, compliance measures being followed, very clear records of those things being done. So again, when a buyer comes and looks under the hood, they see that things have been done in a very, best practice type of way.
And this is a fairly long time. And as time passes, what are the biggest mistakes you see 2 to 3 years before a sale?
Well, a lot of times, and again, we work with a lot of family businesses, for instance, when we first look at the business itself and how it operates, we might see a lot of businesses, they have no written agreements. They have no written operational processes. They're highly dependent on the relationships of the owners. So you can imagine, a founder, sometimes they built those relationships from scratch. They said, well, we don't need written contracts because we're working, in a relationship of trust. They might not have employees or contractors classified correctly. So there's a lack of formality sometimes there. We talked about IP ownership, corporate records, all these things. Those are all kind of the big mistakes that we see because when a buyer comes in, that causes them a lot of pause because there's a lot of risk there if those things aren't done correctly.
I want to talk about those contract issues. What are the biggest problems that you see there?
Yeah, I mean, lack of contracts, poorly written contracts, not standardized or updated or tracked. And sometimes you actually even see some businesses, they have contracts that are, they're in Word format. They were never signed and they're operating on them, but they're totally unenforceable. And so I would say overall, just a lack of formality and review and following best practices.
And then, Kevin, when a buyer comes along, what are buyers actually testing during that diligence?
Well, there's different types of buyers. So it's important to understand who your buyer is to know what they're looking for. So, like the typical private equity buyer who's acquiring a small business because it's a strategic play, they might be looking for something very different than an independent owner operator. They're buying this one business and they're going to work in it. But in general, we want to see, after the sale, is that revenue going to stay there? Are the employees going to stay there? Can this business transfer quickly and without big liability risks? A new buyer doesn't want to take over liabilities from from the seller, and so they're looking at all these sort of value and financial metrics when they come in to just ensure that the value is much bigger and that the risk is much smaller than they would hope.
You said employees, and I didn't even think of that the employees may be loyal to the previous owner. What are the biggest employment related risks that you see?
Well, a lot of times, you have key employees that it's very important that they stay. They have the relationships, they understand how things work, they make it operate. And so, you want to have, it's important to have restrictive covenants, meaning they can't walk out the door and compete with the new owner. Um, Another one is just having a retention strategy. So you don't want to just have sticks if they leave, but you want to have carrots, right? You want to have a strategy there to keep employees in place. So a good compensation structure that makes sense, that it's updated, it's tied to the business goals and outcomes. And then you want to also make sure everybody is classified correctly. So you don't have any sort of liability of not paying overtime or misclassification, those kind of things. So those are all the kind of the employment related risks related to a transfer. Those are the main ones. And in the exit planning process, you try to address those ahead of time so that they don't become a problem for that new buyer that's interested in an acquisition.
And how about the biggest ownership structure problems?
Uh, well, the general theme of problems is that ownership is unclear, undocumented, or they might have the wrong entity structure for the business. So unclear maybe looks like um, you you don't have records reflecting complete ownership, or certain promises were made to make transfers to employees or other people, and maybe those were not executed on, but they were documented partially in some way. And then the entity structure, usually that's a tax driven consideration, just to make sure that it's maximizing its value. So I would say those are the biggest ownership structure issues that we see on the outset when we come in to work with a business.
And then generally speaking, what are the IP related issues that you see?
Yeah, a lot of businesses, especially now, um, the way that they run their processes, maybe software that they have, different things, are intellectual property that form a big portion of the value of the business. And sometimes people don't even really recognize what is a trade secret, what is protectable. Um, and so getting that protection in place, making sure it's documented, that it's key, and that buyers really understand the value of it. Those are big pieces of it. We want to make sure that for instance, the owner doesn't, or some of the owners don't personally own the intellectual property, or that, that it's documented well inside the business that's transferring. So, documentation issues around that. Obviously, potential buyers want to make sure that they're acquiring intellectual property and that it's protected and that it's been protected from theft or misappropriation. So you want to make sure all those documents are in place so they're comfortable that in the acquisition process they're going to get the value of the IP.
Kevin, I need a little definition here. What is a legal mock diligence process?
Yeah, it's really kind of a practice run of a sale. So if you think about without an exit planning process, if a seller is selling their business and a buyer comes in, they might have a team of people, if they're a sophisticated buyer, that's helping execute on the due diligence process. And so, as a seller, you need to be ready for this. You need to have your team ready to execute. You need to have documents in place. They need to be correct. You need to know where they are. You need to be able to transfer them quickly. And so we may actually run a mock process as if, hey, the sale, you just signed an LOI and they want to get this stuff in the next 10 days, this stuff in the next 20 days. And so we could do like a little bit of a practice run so the owner starts to understand what may go wrong. And so when the actual sale day comes, they're really ready.
And I imagine there's a lot of documents that they're going to need to be generating during that mock process. What documents should every business have ready?
Well, the organizational and ownership documents, so initial corporate documents showing records, showing shareholder agreements, just depending on the type of business, bylaws, um, meeting minutes, all the things that reflect what has happened at that corporate and ownership level. And then the contracts with key customers, key vendors, lease agreements, things like that. We've talked a lot about employment type agreements, HR documents, handbooks. We talked about intellectual property agreements, registrations, transfers, trade secret protections, the compliance and litigation summaries, and things like that that reflect where those matters are, because a lot of times they're ongoing. And so I would say those are going to be depending on the type of business, the main categories of documents that owners want to have ready when they have that sale process starting.
Are there more when we're looking at a business that's called always ready? What does an always ready business look like?
Well, sometimes, you prepare for a sale and then you proactively pursue one. But other times, somebody out of the blue comes and makes an offer to a business. And so you want your business to be that sort of always ready business, ready to produce documents, ready to put your best foot forward for a potential buyer. So what does that look like? So everything should be documented, meaning we have it, we know where it is, we can produce it. Things are signed and dated and in order. Everything, is able to be transferred. And so some things that might come up, we talked about this a little bit, but when a business was formed 25 years ago, maybe a relative signed off and got some shares. And so you don't want to be trying to chase down, your Aunt Edna from 30 years ago to get her to sign off on, her share certificate. You want to do all these things ahead of time so you're always ready. And then everything should just be explainable. We should be able to explain clearly through documentation and processes how the business is run, who does what the roles are, what the duties are. And so that kind of a business, you could imagine, it looks very attractive to a buyer because it's organized, it's well run, it's executing, and that's what we call a best in practice business. It's going to trade at the highest possible value within its industry.
And I'm kind of curious what happens when diligence goes well?
Yeah, I mean, so we are in the exit planning process. That's what we're preparing for, a deal that goes well. We want it to go fast. So the buyer's motivated, they're checking things off, they see the value, and they get more excited as they learn more about it. Um, Less sort of rehashing deal terms. That comes up when there are unexpected risks and liabilities, and a buyer says, "Well, I might need some more protections or some better terms, some things I didn't understand until I looked under the hood." And then a better term that ends up being, better terms for a seller. The documents are clean. There's less negotiations needed. And then this is a piece that people don't think about, but you really want there to be post-transaction success. So for the seller, a lot of times it's not just about closing and walking away, but it's about closing and ensuring that your employees, the new buyer, they're all well taken care of, because you care, you invested in it, but also because you don't want post-closing litigation risk. If you have a seller's note, you want to make sure that they're paying on that. So you've got all these things that you want to have gone well. And if you've prepared for that sale, it's more likely it'll go well.
And then what happens on the other side if it doesn't go well, if it goes poorly?
Well, yeah, the exact opposite, right? The buyer, they want reductions in price from what they originally thought. They want contractual protections. They want money held back in escrow. They want indemnity from things that could go wrong. It delays the process, and ultimately it results in a lot of failed deals. I talked about, I think on our last episode, only 20 to 30% of deals actually close. That's a really low number. And so you want to do everything you can to make sure you're not sort of fumbling on the goal line, so to speak. When you've got that buyer that's interested and excited, you want to always be able to put that best foot forward.
And Kevin, what is the cost of waiting too long to start doing your exit planning?
Well, number one is, we talked about a little bit, like there's this range of values in each industry as to where a particular business might sell. It might be 3 times the revenue or 5 times or 9 times. And you want your business as a seller to be at the highest end. You want to be a best in class business. So that's not going to happen if you don't start doing the exit planning. You're just very likely you're not a best in class business without addressing all of these things. Number 2, you're just going to lose leverage. So if you're working with a buyer and documents don't exist, they're poorly drafted, they still need to be written at the last minute, those are all things that make a buyer nervous, and you lose leverage in that process. Making those sort of reactive fixes, that's going to cause you to lose deals, price reduction, poor terms. All those things, I think, are a cost generally of waiting too long to get your business ready to sell.
And I think this is where we want to wrap it up today. What is the best way to start preparing?
Well, the first step really is to put your exit planning team in place. You have to have the right advisors. And so there actually is a certification. I'm a certified exit planner. So that it's something that it's a specialty. It's not just, having a good CPA or having a good advisor, but people that understand this process of getting a business ready to sell. So you want to have those advisors in place. And then you want to do those initial assessments. What do we need to sell this business? And versus where are we right now? What's the value of this business today if it was going to sell? And so we got to identify that gap and then make a plan to close that gap down. So when you do sell, you sell exactly on the terms that you want to and at the value that you want to.
I want to thank you for your insights today. This has been very enlightening. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
My pleasure. If your Florida business is facing a challenge or an opportunity, whether it's a dispute, a transaction, or preparing for growth or exit, visit brickbusinesslaw.com to connect with Kevin and his team. Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and remember, the right legal strategies aren't just protection, they're a path to success. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.